I'm John Little of OmegaShock.com, and this is the Weekend ShockCast for Saturday, May 31st, 2014. If you're like me, a really big disaster is about as fun as having your stomach pumped. I would even prefer a life in the mountains of Taiwan feeding chickens and growing tomatoes. And yes, that's exactly what my lovely wife is threatening me with. The problem is that reality doesn't give breaks and won't allow us to avoid the consequences of ignoring it. So we're stuck with each other, and that reality has turned up clothed in a rather shocking shade of calamity this week. Seriously, I wasn't exactly expecting for peak oil to pop back into the limelight, but it certainly did, hogging the stage, grabbing the microphone, and singing off-key. Having said that, peak oil, along with this confluence of multiple disaster cycles, is an amazing story. Here we are, thinking that the world in which we live is the most normal thing in the world, when in reality it's the biggest freak show in 5,000 years. I really don't know whether to laugh or cry. And yes, I really do include myself in this mass delusion that we've built for ourselves. We convinced ourselves that something this good must be natural and last as long as we want it to. Seriously. What were we thinking? And why did it take me this long to figure it out? I spent more than 40 years of my life living a delusionary fantasy of oil-fueled prosperity while I was helping burn away the future. I feel hoodwinked, but I don't really have anyone to blame. We've all been hoodwinked by our own inability to grasp how incredible our situation is. The trap that we find ourselves in is both awe-inspiring and shocking. Who would have thought that our mighty civilization could be so effectively brought to its knees by such a small miscalculation? Of course, it really isn't a small miscalculation, and we really should have known what was coming. But whatever the cause of the pickle that we find ourselves in, there can be no argument that we are in truly dire straits. The disaster rolling down on us is awesome to behold. I can hardly believe how bad it is. Billions of people are going to die, all because we goofed. Our parents and grandparents laughed at M. King Hubbard, and now their children and grandchildren get to pay the price. Of course, that's how the end of empire works. I guess that we should be lucky to be able to complain. What's not so lucky is the fact that our brothers and sisters are completely unaware of the dire nature of their situation. We are in a heap of trouble, and there is nothing that we can do except tell everyone to get out of the way. This runaway train is going over the cliff, and it might happen this year. Worse, I see the book of Revelation in the midst of this story and hear the thunderous hooves of the 4 horsemen. I don't want any of us entangled in what those riders are up to. Please, get ready for the worst moment in time for 5,000 years. So, what did we talk about this week? This week it was the convergence of cycles and peak oil. Harry Dent Jr. had some interesting thoughts to share about how a demographic shock will arrive this year. And then I spent some time researching the comeback of peak oil, and it truly is as disastrous as ever. What an incredible apocalypse this end of cheap energy is. And when it all finally hits us, there won't be any warning. So let's talk about that. On Monday, it was Demographic Shock 2014, Harry Dent. I find our cognitive limitations to be interesting, fascinating even. It seems that we can only hold so many ideas at any one time. Introduce a new one beyond our capability to hold, and we either have the stress of living beyond our capabilities, which can be good short term, or we need to let an old idea fade. I say that because I've run across someone with a profoundly important idea for this moment in time in which we live, and he has made some vital and important predictions in the past using that idea. But he also has a history of plugging that idea in too many areas and getting negative results. That man is Harry Dent, and he has something to say about the demographic shock that begins this year. By the way, as you take inventory of the important ideas in your life, there is one idea that must always be first and reign supreme: Jesus Christ. Nothing should ever compete in your mind for that space, ever. And please be careful about the junk that you allow to take up space in your head. Really, it's important. Garbage in, garbage out. Harry Dent has a head for demographics, and he was able to identify the impact of demographics that led to Japan's lost decade, the recession of 1990 to 1992, a rather large bull market, and the 2008 credit crisis and stock market crash. He now identifies a demographic crisis that starts this year and will dwarf all the other crises that we have faced so far. And he says that this demographic model tells him that this year will be the beginning of a great crash that won't really end until 2019. Hearing him mention that time frame made my ears ring. That's the time frame that I'm looking at also. Furthermore, his ideas about demographics make a lot of sense. Having said that, demographics don't exist in a vacuum. There are many, many other issues out there, and his models don't really take them into account. That's why he goofed when he wrote the Roaring 2000s, followed by the next great bubble boom, How to Profit from the Greatest Boom in History, 2006 to 2010. Oops. Does that mean that his ideas should be relegated to the dustbin? No, not if they make sense. Just don't get carried away when he launches out into areas that his models do not and should not encompass. Furthermore, brilliant analysts make brilliant mistakes. This is how the investment world works. I have a video by Fabian Calvo that has something to say about Harry Dent's checkered predictions. It's called Harry Dent Years of Bad Predictions. You can see it in the article. In the show notes of the above video, Mr. Calvo provides 2 links to the articles about Harry Dent's mistakes from Barron's and CBSNews.com. I like Fabian. He's got lots of passion and a heart for helping others, and he has some profound information. I don't agree with him on everything, but I do listen. You should too. So yes, Harry Dent made some bad calls in the past, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't have a profoundly important idea. Here's the video that made me think. It's called GSR Interviews Harry Dent Jr., May 21st, 2014. In that interview, Harry makes an interesting point. Economists do not study demographics, and then Harry goes on to say that he is not an economist, which is actually a point in his favor. For those of you who think that he would have done better to be an economist, let me point out that economists have a lousy track record when predicting the future. Far worse than Harry's. Far worse. So what is he predicting? People losing faith in governments and everything. Deflation. Massive deflation. He's also somewhat bearish on gold, but he's not really sure. I find his point about people losing faith in government to be very important because the 300-year Civil War, civil unrest cycle that begins to hit us this year also correlates with this idea. And this lack of faith in government will cause a massive boost in a desire for a one-world government. But that's not his most important point. He's talking massive, massive deflation. He's talking about the Great Depression on steroids, and I think that he's probably right. Is he allowing for the capital flows that will flood into the United States as people seek for a safe haven for their money? I'm not sure that he is, so his cyclical models may be off by a year or so, but that doesn't change the underlying demographic fundamentals. You must get out of the U.S. stock market. You must. If you are in, get out now. And while you're at it, get your money out of the United States and get yourself out too. The Great Depression on steroids will destroy America in ways that will blow your mind, and I don't think that Harry Dent really gets that part either. This is the end of the American empire and the beginning of war and upheaval everywhere. You do not want to be caught in the blast, so get out of ground zero. Now, should you buy gold if deflation is coming? Absolutely yes. During the greatest deflationary period in U.S. history, gold went up, not down. Gold is absolutely a hedge against inflation and deflation. In fact, it probably is a better hedge against deflation than inflation. Now, would you make more money holding a wad of cash during a deflationary crash like Harry describes? You might. But you're assuming that the dollar will survive. You're also assuming that the world will continue to accept the dollar. You'd have to assume a lot of things, and assumptions in the face of disaster are dangerous. Get out of stocks and bonds, and buy physical in your hands gold. Better yet, buy as much silver as you can carry, and as much gold as you can afford. Seriously, folks, this year is the turning point. The stock market might still go up and up from this point on for another few months, and it might not. But that shouldn't matter to you. Since disaster is completely inevitable, let me remind you of the first rule of investing. Never lose money. Here's the second rule. It's better to be years too early than 5 minutes late. Once the market turns, your savings and your financial future will be destroyed before you can escape. You will never, ever be able to time the crash that is coming. Get out now, buy silver and gold. Better yet, do everything that I talk about in the shock plan for getting ready that I provide in my website. Please also remember that there are those who would love to prepare and don't have the money to do so. I get emails from people that are living paycheck to paycheck but do not have the ability to do what I am asking them to do, and it breaks my heart to see them. This is where you come in. If God has blessed you with wealth and understanding of what is coming, then it is now your job to help those who cannot help themselves. Are you ready to do that? God said that when you provide for the needs of your brothers and sisters in Christ, you give to Him. Matthew 25:31-46. If you ignore their needs and do not seek out the needs of those in the family of God, well, Matthew 25 indicates that there is a place for those who do that. Life is short. Eternity is long. Which would you rather invest in? Please note that I am not offering financial or disaster preparation advice in a professional capacity. These are merely my own thoughts on what I would do in these situations. On Wednesday, it was disaster cycles converge with peak oil for a perfect storm. I didn't do an article yesterday because I needed to spend time doing some research. I had an idea that peak oil was still out there ready to spring on us after hearing Steve St. Angelo talk about fracking hype. But I needed to make sure. Unfortunately, now I'm sure. Peak oil is alive and well on planet Earth and is about to combine with 3 different disaster cycles to do unimaginable damage to us. And just like the crises of the recent past, we've papered over the problem with debt and lies. And now this downward spiral is going to turn into a catastrophe. When I ran into Martin Armstrong's work, I was impressed by what he had to say about cycles. His models had an uncanny ability to predict the future, and the future they were predicting was grim. Very grim. So I wrote about them. Ezekiel's fire and the ECM, the disaster cycle bringing Ezekiel's fire, and the rise of the Antichrist begins in 2020. Martin Armstrong is telling us that 3 incredibly important cycles are hitting us almost at once. The 8-point-year economic cycle will turn down and cause a financial collapse toward the end of 2015. And for the 25-year war cycle and for the 300-year Civil War cycle, both of those cycles hit us this year. That was head-for-the-hills news for someone with an excellent track record for getting things right. But unfortunately, I uncovered another person with an excellent track record for getting things right. His name is Charles Nenner, and I wrote about what he had to say here. Another cycle's expert agrees collapse and war coming. In fact, Charles is probably even more pessimistic than Martin, and both of them have something awful to say. But it didn't stop even there. Demographics expert Harry Dent Jr. offered his own observations, and I wrote about it here. Demographic Shock 2014, Harry Dent. That demographic bomb is going to do an amazing amount of damage to us and to the economy, and the financial markets are going to get hurt very badly by it. And then yesterday, as I thought about all of that, I realized that there was something else that was probably lurking out there in the dark recesses of our future. Peak oil. I've written about it before, and you can see that it is one of the 4 big challenges facing the U.S. and the world at large. You can read what I've had to say about peak oil and the resource shocks that are barreling down on us here. It's in my category, Resource Shock, on omegashock.com. Then go to the About Omegashock page for a description of the 4, soon 5+, big challenges that we face. The problem is that a lot of fracking hype and hyperbole has been sloshing about, and Wall Street money has been chasing it. It has been a feeding frenzy, but it has slowly dawned on some of the feeders that they aren't getting what they paid for. up to now, mainstream media has been trumpeting the glorious message of the death of peak oil at the hands of the frackers. And the artificial suppression of interest rates by the Federal Reserve has allowed the companies doing the fracking to keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. The problem is that most, if not all, of the fracking profits have evaporated. For a short time, fracking distorted the peak oil forecast. Experts thought that the peak in world oil production would occur in 2005, and that did happen, for normal sources of oil. Conventional oil production has been in decline since 2005, and it has been unconventional oil that has made up the difference. So the question then is, when does peak oil really happen? Apparently, when you add in unconventional sources of oil, like fracking, peak oil happened 2 years ago. However, some positive souls estimate that peak oil will arrive this year, or the next. Unfortunately, this disagreement over dates isn't all that important because no matter how you slice it, it means death for America and civilization as we know it. And yes, it really is that bad. If we hadn't allowed the government and media to lie to us, we might have managed something of a transition. We could have gone in for more coal usage. We could have done more with solar and wind power. We could have taken a bit of the flood of money going into the banks and set up some kind of infrastructure to soften the blow that is about to fall on us. But we didn't do that. Now, as the financial cycle gets ready to start downward, as the war cycles heat up, as the demographic shock begins to hit us, we are going to be hammered by a peak oil apocalypse. Please understand that this means war, death, and destruction on an unimaginable scale. Everyone is going to fight for what they see as their share of what is left of the world's oil reserves, especially the United States. And that fight has already started. The coup staged by the U.S. State Department and the CIA in Ukraine was a part of that war. The U.S. and Saudi involvement in the Syrian war is a part of that, as is the CIA funding of terrorist groups in Africa and Asia. But that is about to change. Now that our financial chickens are coming home to roost, world conflict is going to explode. I can't see the psychopaths running the U.S. government and the financial system being passive in the face of the destruction of their wealth and power, so they're going to take the gloves off and lose. Oh, the U.S. Navy and Air Force are powerful entities, and the U.S. Army still has teeth. So there will be some early wins in the coming war. But as I've said before, a powerful military cannot function without a prosperous economy, and America doesn't have that. Worse, the U.S. is not prepared for the kind of war her enemies are ready to fight. Where we sit now is just the calm before the storm. The cycles of financial collapse, war, and demographics converge at a moment in time when peak oil finally makes its appearance. It would be hard to find a more catastrophic perfect storm. The clouds of this perfect storm are on the horizon, but we cannot be completely sure when it will arrive. It could be this fall. It could be next year. If we're really lucky, we might even have more time than that, but I doubt it. Do not look around you and expect tomorrow to be like today. It will not. You will look back one day and realize that this was the pinnacle of our civilization, the top. Nothing will ever be this good again, until the Lord returns. On Thursday, it was peak oil apocalypse. I talked about a perfect storm yesterday, and as I look back on what I said, I can only say that the conclusions are completely inescapable. As this perfect storm approaches and starts to rip away at civilization's facade, the world is going to come crashing down around us. It didn't have to happen this way, but it is going to happen, and God has said that it would happen. More than 25% of the Bible describes the last days, and most of that description is horrifying. But when you think about the true implications of just peak oil, well, the devastation described in the Bible no longer seems quite so astonishing. I used to wonder why science and technology exploded in the 20th century. It was amazing to see the course of history putter along for thousands of years with just a few innovations along the way, and then see a massive explosion of science, technology, and, well, everything. It was as if someone flipped a switch. But I speak in the past tense because I now know the source of all this magnificent progress. According to agweb.com, the average U.S. farmer feeds 155 people. But that wasn't always the case. In 1940, one farmer could feed 19 people. More than a century ago, one farmer fed 2.5. What made the difference? Science, followed by technology. But wait, science requires scientists, and scientists need to eat. So how did we get science going? Slowly. That's why science and scientific innovation didn't really accelerate until the 1960s. And yes, I do know that there are other factors involved, but food production has always been the single most defining constraint on the development of civilization. What gave farmers the ability to produce enough food to feed enough scientists so that they could produce even more food? Oil. Try plowing a field without a tractor and see how far you get. And there really is only one efficient source for the fuels that a tractor needs: oil. Use anything else and your food production goes down. So if you want to know where our fantastic civilization comes from, look no farther than oil. For a closer look, watch this video. It's called "There's No Tomorrow: Peak Oil Energy Growth in the Future." I know that the title of this video sounds awfully pessimistic, but it really isn't. Unfortunately, when you think through what is shown in that video, you realize that there's much that they've glossed over. What the movie doesn't talk about is our inability to adjust our way of thinking. And when things get bad, we press harder on the accelerator, making things worse. Then we go over the cliff and crash. And that's pretty much how human history has worked, and that's what we are doing right now with oil. Now, take a look at the graph that I included in the article. It's called "A Brief History of Oil and Humans." And if you look at that graph, the population skyrockets right at the time that oil production does. In 1804, human population was 1 billion. It was 2 billion in 1927. It was 3 billion in 1960. It was 4 billion in 1974, 5 billion in 1987, 6 in 1999, and 7 billion in 2012. Estimates are that we'll reach 8 billion in 2027. Unfortunately, that won't happen. We could putter along as a population at 1 billion without oil. You could even make a case for being able to sustain a population of 2 billion without oil. Even 3. But more than that? Okay, yes, if we all worked together and went back to farming like our ancestors, we could support all of that. But do you really think that the global elites will go for that? Of course not. So, since we are not going to prepare ourselves for a decline in oil production, we are going to kill off billions of people. Or more accurately, they'll kill each other off, with the help of those psychopaths that are running the governments of this world. Do you honestly think that the U.S., Europe, Asia, etc. will sit still while their standards of living crash? Of course not. What a silly question. This means that we are going to kill each other. Can you see why the descriptions of the last days in the Bible are so awful? But I bet that you're thinking that all of this is in the future, right? Not so fast. Please understand that the U.S. Federal Reserve has been pumping massive amounts of cheap money into the global financial system, and that has kept everything afloat. Furthermore, that has kept the fracking accelerator pressed to the floor. When the cheap debt turns off, fracking will turn off, and when fracking turns off, it will be Katie bar the door. That means that the true state of the world's energy problems will be completely revealed. Food prices worldwide will rise dramatically. People already in marginal economies, like in Africa and the Middle East, will explode into revolution. Areas in Central and South Asia will be in full riot. No one will be doing well. No one. The U.S. and Europe will have collapsed, but they'll look good by comparison, for a while. They will take advantage of all that to grab and protect as much as they can. But that won't last long. Russia and China will not stand idly by, and both of those nations have had decades to prepare countermeasures for Euro-American military superiority. People have had visions of nuclear war in America, and this is where that would happen. Once Europe was neutralized and America out of the way, Russia and China would have a free hand, and we know what Russia will do with that free hand. Gog and Magog. and that means Ezekiel's fire. What was left from the wars and devastation wrought by our own hand will be crushed by this fire described in Ezekiel 39:6. So, when does the collapse of cheap debt start this avalanche of disaster? Any moment between now and 2018. There is a moderate probability for this year. There is a high probability starting in the fall of 2015. 2016 sees the probability go extremely high. After that, well, it's anybody's guess. Are you going to gamble on the future? The summer is ahead of us. Now is the time to prepare for the absolute worst. Now, this really is a life and death issue, and you owe it to yourself to understand it. I provide several resources in the article at the bottom. There's peakprosperity.com, the crash course, resilience.org on the energy area. Energy Skeptic has some resources there, and I have the resource Shock on omegashock.com, and ourfiniteworld.com has an interesting article called The Beginning of the End, Oil Companies Cut Back on Spending. There are a ton of resources out there, so there are lots of opportunities to learn. And then share what you know. As God said to Ezekiel in Ezekiel 3:16-21, God said that those who see danger without giving warning, the deaths of those who die will be held against you. Are you ready for that? On Friday, it was, there will be no warning. We are at a tipping point. Give us just a nudge and we'll go over. That nudge can come from anywhere and be almost anything, and we won't see it coming. The problem is that you did see it coming. I've been writing about it. Others have as well. We just can't tell you exactly when the fireworks begin, and that's how all great catastrophes happen. The stage is set. All the actors are in their places. The orchestra is warmed up and in tune. All that we lack is for that enigmatic creature, the Black Swan event, to arrive. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that I hear the flutter of her wings right now. None of us like being early for things. Come an hour early to something and we fret over all that we could have done instead. Sell a stock before it reaches its top and we kick ourselves over all the money that we didn't make. We all do it, so it's understandable that many of you would want to get in a few more months of the good life before making those drastic changes that we call disaster preparation. We like our big lives and balk at the idea of giving them up. Even those of us with small lives have something to lose, and we hesitate to let go of what little we have. That's why we tell ourselves that we'll wait for a clear warning before making those painful preparations. I certainly understand that. After all, I'm as human as you are. Unfortunately, waiting for a warning is a recipe for disaster. There will be no clear warning until it's too late to do anything about it. Every catastrophe is like that. In the article Tipping Points that I wrote in February, I said, when the privately held Bank of the United States failed in 1931, headlines screamed across America, terrifying the population into the erroneous thought that the U.S. banking system had failed, resulting in a string of bank runs that would play a great role in what we call the Great Depression. Did we see the failure of the Bank of the United States coming? Here, let me answer that question. No, we didn't. As Jim Rickards pointed out in his excellent interview with Greg Hunter, it is the thing you won't see coming that will take the system down. Things happen much more quickly than what investors expect. The banksters and psychopaths running the system have all the obvious trigger events covered. If someone comes to you and says, July 1st will be the end of the financial system, tell them where to go with that information because the elites have it covered. Anything you can see has already been dealt with. It's the stuff that not only you can't see, but they can't either. That is what will finally take the system down. Please understand that the Luciferian elites want to keep milking the system for as long as they can. Yes, I understand about their plans to destroy everything and remold it nearer to the heart's desire. But they're going to wait until the last minute to do it because they're as greedy as anyone else, and human. This means that they'll get it wrong in spectacular fashion and burn their fingers. Of course, they'll still get the war and devastation that they wanted, so don't cry for them too much. The point is that you won't have the warning that you need to jump out of the way if you wait until the last minute. So please, don't wait. Get started now. But wait, what if you jump too soon? What a horrible, horrible thought. But you'll live. And that's the point, right? Here's the excellent interview that I mentioned above. It's on Greg Hunter's USAWatchdog.com, and it's labeled Gem Records, Financial Collapse, and Massive Shortages in Gold Coming. There's an article page for the interview that contains the summary on Greg Hunter's website. The disaster that tips everything over will come unannounced. Don't wait to get ready. Do it now. Are you ready for this? Are you ready for all of this? This has been the Weekend ShockCast for Saturday, May 31st, 2014. I'm John Little from Megashock.com. I hope you have a great weekend.